This Week in Virology, the podcast about viruses, the kind that make you sick. This Week in Virology, Episode 6 for October 29th, 2008. I'm Vincent Racaniello.
And I'm Dick Despommier.
And we're back in Dick's office after missing Dick for a week. Where were you, Dick?
I was up in Maine.
What are you doing? Is there something to do in Maine?
There was something to do in Maine. Yes, that's right, besides eat lobster. In fact, there's an interesting story there, but I won't go there. I was attending a meeting called Pop Tech, and it's sponsored by the National Geographic Society and Steelcase and a whole bunch of other socially committed companies to social change for the better. And so this meeting, it's in its 12th year, and they asked me to give a talk on vertical farming. And I did. And I met a lot of interesting people, and I heard some fascinating talks on they ranged in topic from neural networks and political choice to how to teach a 16-year-old kid to play a Bach piece from scratch. He had some knowledge of this, of course, but the director of the Boston Symphony was there and gave a wonderful lesson to this kid. It was the most endearing thing I've ever heard.
Any viruses?
We didn't get into that one. Actually, Ian Lipkin was there, also from our school at Columbia University, and he talked a lot about viruses.
Great.
And how to detect them, and how to use viral chips,
right.
And how the modern technologies have advanced our ability to detect emerging infections in various places. And in fact, Laurie Garrett was there also. So she teamed up with Ian Lipkin, and they had a very nice presentation.
And Laurie Garrett is the journalist, of course.
Yes, that's right.
She's written the book called The Coming Plague.
The Coming Plague, but she's got 3 Ps. She won a Pulitzer. Mm-hmm. She won a...
Okay, very good.
Those other 2 prizes begin with P as well, so she's got 3 of them.
Well, we'll put a link in the show notes so people can see what's up. And I know they put videos of the talks up on their website. Maybe we'll see yours someday, or Ian's, or
it'd be fun
like that. Well, I had a talk last week with Saul Silverstein
about
herpes, as you know. And so I'm happy to see you here again. Today we have a potpourri of topics we're going to talk about. There's been a lot in the news lately. And the first thing I want to bring up is polio. And we talked about polio a few episodes ago.
That was our second episode. Sorry.
There was an article yesterday in the New York Times. Did you know the New York Times is the paper of record? It just records everything, history. I also heard that they're going to go out of business.
What?
Because the ad revenue is declining so much that they can't sustain the paper anymore. I don't know if it's true.
Oh, my God. They just built a brand new building. Rienzo Piana will be very disappointed.
I don't know what the circulation of the paper is. I suspect the website does very well.
It's in the millions.
And maybe the website does fine in terms of ad revenue. But anyway, there was an article yesterday called Polio Spreads to New Countries and Increases Where It's Endemic. Anyway, the gist of this article is that infections are increasing this year and spreading to new countries. So right now, polio is endemic, and that word means a virus is circulating in a country and it doesn't have to be reintroduced continuously, right?
Exactly.
It's endemic in 4 countries: Nigeria, Afghanistan, India, and Pakistan.
Right.
And the number of cases in these 4 countries have increased this year compared to the same time last year.
Any particular reason for that, Vince?
We don't know. Now, there are different reasons why there continues to be polio in each of these countries, and let's go over that. The easy one is Nigeria, where they stopped immunizing a few years ago. Do you remember that?
I do.
The reason they stopped immunizing is because they decided that the vaccine is a Western product, and they didn't trust it. So for 1 year, no one was immunized. And this, of course, allowed the virus to come back into the country.
But of course.
Cause polio, but more importantly, to spread to other countries.
Yep.
So this, even though they resumed immunizing in Nigeria, they haven't been able to stop the epidemic. So now there's a full-blown epidemic.
Right.
And it's spreading to other countries. In Africa, for example, there were 2 cases in Ghana, which had been polio-free for 5 years. So it's probably coming from Nigeria. And there are lots of other new countries in Africa that had not previously seen polio for a long time.
That's all they need is just one more disease to worry about, huh?
So I think in Nigeria, the issue is that they haven't yet been able to overcome the ill-advised decision to stop immunizing for 1 year. Listen to this number. So at this time in 2007, October, there were 210 cases of polio in Nigeria. This year so far, there's 728.
Wow.
Now, that may not seem like much, but these are cases of paralytic disease.
Right.
For every case of paralytic disease, there are between 1 and 200 people infected who don't show symptoms.
Wow.
The so-called asymptomatic infection. So there are a lot of people infected and spreading this.
Goodness.
So that's Nigeria. Afghanistan and Pakistan have polio because there are wars going on there. There's armed conflict.
And the control measures break down during those
It's very
times,
difficult to
don't they?
immunize everyone.
Sure,
If we could get in and immunize, I think we could conquer in those countries. Now, India, 486 cases so far, 326 in 2007 by this time.
Is there a regional distribution to this?
So there is an area of India called Uttar Pradesh, which is in the west.
Very famous.
And they have a big problem.
Very famous.
And there they have been immunizing very intensively, but apparently the vaccine is not working. And in the past, many reasons have been put forth to explain this, and maybe the diet is somehow interfering with the virus. Remember, the virus you ingest and it replicates in your intestines.
Yep.
So if it's something diet, or maybe other pathogens in the intestine are interfering. The New York Times said that diarrhea is a big problem. If these kids have diarrhea when they get the oral vaccine,
I see.
Then it all comes out.
It washes right on through without attaching.
So you could imagine there might be a lot of diarrhea in this region. So this is a problem that needs to be solved. And here in the Times article, they suggested that the Indian Academy of Pediatrics has endorsed using the injectable vaccine for those who can afford it. So the injectable vaccine is killed, so it doesn't depend on replicating in the gut. It's just injected into your muscle. I think this would solve a lot of the problems. The issue is it's more costly than... I think it's about $1 a dose as opposed to a penny per dose for the live vaccine. Do you know why it's more expensive?
Because you have to have a team to give it.
Also, that not many companies make it. It's economy of scale, right? And I've been at meetings where representatives from various companies have said, if you give us the green light, we'll make enough of it to make it a penny a dose.
Gotcha.
But I think that eventually the world will switch to using the killed vaccine because the live one can cause polio as long as you use it. And there's still viruses circulating in the sewers long after you immunize with the live vaccine. So, all right, next thing up, Bloomberg.com this week. West Nile virus in California swimming pools. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago. Do you remember, Dick?
We sure did.
What's the issue here?
Well, if you don't clean your pool with a filter and you just leave the pool sit there, it will start to act like an ecosystem, and eventually the chlorine will evaporate off, and it will attract unwanted visitors.
Mosquitoes. So in California, people lose their homes, they lose their mortgages. Right?
Oh, wow.
And
or it rains and you still have a pool.
The pool.
It creates stagnant water, and these mosquitoes love that stuff.
So the cases of, I'm not quite sure what this number, they have 140 incidents where they've isolated virus from mosquitoes in the Los Angeles area.
Right.
So this is going up since we talked about it last time, and that correlates with a 300% increase in home delinquencies in the county.
Sure.
60% of mosquitoes captured at these pools were Culex tarsalis, as opposed to Culex pipiens. Why is that significant?
Not much. I think these two mosquito species share common habitats, and so they're probably in competition with each other. They're both competent vectors, though, for West Nile in people and in birds.
They also say that there have been 140 laboratory-confirmed cases of West Nile in Bakersfield, which is another Central California, very hot and dry. 276% more than 2006.
Exactly.
Bakersfield has the 4th highest U.S. foreclosure rate. Oh, my gosh. So they have a picture here, which is an aerial photograph of a neighborhood, which shows 17% of the 42 visible pools had turned green.
Wow.
That's where these mosquitoes are growing.
Wow.
Chemicals are gone, right?
Chemicals are gone, and so are the people.
So this is going to continue. It's warm in California for quite a few months, right?
Quite a bit. It's an endemic infection in California now. Endemic.
So we'll see. We'll keep an eye on this. Now, in sort of a related issue, I found an article. The credit virus spreads worldwide.
Aha.
So this is about the credit crunch.
Is that an RNA credit virus or a
RNA,
DNA?
Is it envelope or icosahedral?
I think it's a reverse cash flow virus.
Isn't it interesting how bad things are called viruses? So computer viruses, credit virus now.
Well, this probably spreads by logarithmic progression of you start with 1, you get 2, you get 4, you get 8, you get 16, you get 32.
Actually, you're wrong, Dick.
Up. For once.
That's how bacteria
or for
grow.
another.
That's how bacteria grow.
Virus
One virus goes into a cell and you get lots. Exactly.
Okay.
I don't mean to be insulting.
No, you weren't.
I pointed out
me.
because I teach that to my virology class, and that is one of the distinguishing features, which initially confused scientists because they were used to bacteria growing 1 to 2, 2 to 4.
Yeah, right.
But viruses don't do that. One goes in the cell and millions or hundreds or thousands come out.
Gotcha.
So, yes, these things that spread uncontrollably are called viruses. Computer viruses also need a computer to spread in, which is very much like the biological virus.
Sure.
Right?
But wouldn't you say the computer virus is more like a bacteria in terms of its reproduction than a virus?
No. I think you go into a computer and that virus triggers 1,000 copies of itself in your email system.
Oh, I see.
And then so I think it's much like a virus.
All right.
It's the right name. And then there are viral videos, which spread wildly, popularity and so forth. So the computer information age has borrowed this term from biology because, of course, viruses were here long before CPUs and memory.
Indeed. And they will be here
if
long
I could
after.
borrow, they will be. Well, there will be animal hosts once, far after the humans are all gone. We have borrowed one thing from the computer age, so the field of virology. And here, I'll throw this by you. Tell me what you think.
As a non-virologist, I'd be happy to give you my opinion.
Even if you weren't. Viruses are the ultimate spammers. Now, you know what a spammer is.
I do.
An email is somebody who
Lots
of emails that aren't wanted.
So you're probably talking about introns and exons.
No, the virus
not even
just
that.
throws millions of copies of itself at you.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Unwanted.
Hopes that one of them succeeds?
Yes, exactly.
All
and it's
right.
the same with an email spammer.
Okay.
He or she throws out millions of emails in hopes that a few succeed and they make money. So I'm borrowing that term from the computer people, and we're going to take it and use it in virology. What do you think of that?
I love it.
Ultimate spammers. I didn't make it up, by the way. Neil Stephenson, Cryptonomicon. Excellent book.
Cryptonomicon. Sounds like a Superman anti-thing.
No, it's a book about cryptography.
Oh, okay.
Very interesting, actually. But he seems to understand biology because he made that comment about viruses, and it's bloody brilliant.
Yeah, bankers seem to be attracted to molecular biology for the same reason. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of interesting bankers out there, like this guy Baruch Benacerraf was a banker before he was an immunologist because he saw similarities in the two fields.
Wow.
That takes a special mind to see that.
Because, there was a time in the 50s when molecular biology was a brand new field, and the subject initially were bacteriophages, viruses of bacteria.
Exactly.
And some of the earliest bacteriophages were physicists.
Right.
Max Delbruck, Leo Szilard, I can't pronounce his name. They were physicists. So I have a feeling they had this analytical view of things, very quantitative, and that was perfect for the early days of molecular biology.
And they looked like crystals. It looked like it had some kind of physical property to them.
Population biology was all
yep.
very good for a physicist.
Yeah, wow.
So that's an interesting. Okay, now the next story we have today.
We wonder sometimes, but it's good. The wandering virologists.
I tell you, Dick, I could record all my conversations, and they might be interesting. I had a conversation in the car this morning with a friend of mine about the problem with pharmaceutical companies and layoffs and employment lately, as you know. And actually, we should probably have him on one day because he has some interesting ideas. In Massachusetts, a man died of mosquito-borne TWiV virus. What would that be?
Eastern equine encephalitis.
73-year-old man.
Flavivirus.
He died, 73 years old, and they think he caught it in Maine or New Hampshire.
Naturally, not in Massachusetts.
So what do you think of that, Dick?
'Tis the season. Actually, this is not an unusual finding. And in fact, I think in our original program on West Nile virus, I mentioned the fact that New Jersey has 21 counties, and each one of them has a mosquito control board. It's not to control West Nile virus. It's not to control malaria, which we don't have anymore. It's to control Eastern equine encephalitis because New Jersey has a big horse racing industry, and they have a lot of horse racing areas in New Jersey where they're raised. Besides Kentucky. I mean, you'd think Kentucky was the home for this, but actually New Jersey doesn't do so bad. And so you go down to southern part of New Jersey, around Atlantic City, Monmouth County. There's the Monmouth Racetrack. Mosquitoes carry Eastern equine, and so they have to be on the lookout for this all the time. Unfortunately, New Jersey, they're carried by the salt marsh mosquito, has a flight range of 25 miles.
Huge.
That's an enormous flight range.
What would he have been bitten by in Maine or New Hampshire?
Well, some form of salt marsh mosquito, and that's Aedes sollicitans is the one that we're worried about there.
So this is quite rare, right?
Rare in humans, very common
yes.
in wild animals. It's a bird disease. It's carried by migrating birds, and that's the reason why there's a season to this. There's a spring and a fall season for transmission of Eastern equine encephalitis. The birds give it to local mosquitoes, and then the local mosquitoes bite horses and other things. And, of course, they have preferences. And, you're lucky because Eastern equine encephalitis is usually a horse disease, equine, the word equine. And there's a western part to this, too, by the way. There's another local-like virus out in the west.
Western, not equine, yes.
And they're mosquito-borne, too. Yeah. And people don't usually get in the way of it, but if you do, it doesn't matter how old or how young you are, you usually end up dying from this thing.
Actually, I stumbled on the disease maps. There's a U.S. Geological Survey website that has disease maps, but they're limited to mosquito-borne diseases. And if you compare the eastern and western, geographically very restricted.
Absolutely.
It must be because of the vector?
And the birds.
The birds as well.
The flyways. It's all due to the flyways.
Now, this man was unfortunate because he was old, and that's why he died, most likely.
Well, no. Little children can die.
Little children and old, but not in between.
Yeah,
you and I, in the prime of our lives, we
would die from this. This is a very bad virus.
What about a 40-year-old?
It's a bad virus, no matter who gets it.
Okay.
There's no cure.
So why are there so few deaths here? 6 deaths from 2004 to 2006.
Well, because the mosquitoes that prefer animals can usually find them. So they'll bite rodents or birds or horses, in this case, cattle.
How does a mosquito prefer one host over the other?
You know, we have a guy working right over here at Columbia University, Richard Axel. He got a Nobel Prize for his work on smell. That was in the mouse. He's now redirected his attention to how mosquitoes detect odors. And maybe we should have him on here sometime to tell us why a mosquito would have a preference, since they start out detecting CO2, and then once they get up close, they detect other odors, and based on those other odors, they either bite you or they don't. And
fabulous.
It's a very interesting system.
One can imagine that this would be a point of intervention.
No kidding. And in fact, Richard has already determined that DEET, which is the major rub-on anti-mosquito device that we've got, we have nothing else basically, right? It's present in these commercial products called OFF and all these other things. It's basically the DEET that's repellent. It confuses their sense of smell. In fact, it blocks their entire repertoire of smell. And so it doesn't hit it at one point, it blocks the whole system, so they don't even find anything. They end up starving to death or going to somebody without DEET.
So probably this old man was in the woods.
Or near the shore. You can be down at the shore. Maybe he was a bird watcher.
Yes.
You know, there's a lot of people out in the fall watching migratory birds because there are very few places left where you can actually find a wilderness-like environment to see the birds landing and behaving normally. This guy Peterson has a guide for birds Guess where he said the best place to watch birds is along the entire eastern seaboard of the United States.
Are you a bird watcher?
I am, because I do a lot of trout fishing, and I don't catch a lot of fish, so I watch a lot of birds. So he says Central Park in New York City is a great place to go bird watching because it's the one little patch of green in an otherwise paved-over environment.
So all the birds congregate there.
And Cape May, New Jersey is another place like that also. So these people are attracted to those regions, especially during the migration routes, and eastern equine encephalitis is a problem, and every now and then somebody gets nailed. But mostly it's a horse disease, a local horse.
I'm still not sure I understand the host preference, but maybe we'll come back to it another time. If a lot of mosquitoes carry the virus, why aren't more people infected?
Well,
I know that there's a preference. It's a smell thing.
Yeah, and so how do you tell which one they bit? And the easy way to do it is a PCR reaction on blood proteins inside the female mosquito, and you can tell what host that was by just looking at that.
Good idea. Clearly, one should survey mosquitoes more extensively.
Absolutely.
That would be very interesting.
No question.
Right?
And it's done.
We have the technology to do it.
We do, and Rutgers University, by the way, in New Jersey at least, and several other places too. The University of California at Davis, and there are a few out in the Midwest. I think University of Michigan as well.
They do these surveys?
They do routine surveys.
Is there any way we can find out the results of these surveys? Are they?
I'm sure they have websites for this, and
we'll look at it.
Maybe we should get in touch with them.
All right. Now, our next story is from Australia.
Aha.
Where is it Australia?
Is this the Hendra virus we're going to hear about?
No, not yet.
No.
Hang on, Dick.
Sorry, I'm jumping ahead here.
Sorry, it's an Australian newspaper, but there's a British mother and child, and I don't... I think it happened in Britain, and it's reported in the Herald Sun, which is Australia's biggest selling daily newspaper. Anyway, this young lady, 32 years old, had a baby. And at about the time that she had the baby, she developed a fever sore on her mouth. And shortly after they brought the baby home, the baby died of what is called here herpes simplex infection.
Wow.
So apparently this was the first time this young lady had ever had a fever sore.
Gee whiz.
And do you know why that would make the baby particularly susceptible?
Well, there's no maternal antibodies then, is there?
Exactly. So she had no previous infection, no immunity. Normally the mother would transfer antibodies to the fetus, which would protect it for a month or so after birth until it could make its own immune response. But apparently in this case, she was naive and the timing was bad. Now, what I don't understand here, there are some inconsistencies here, which call me to question this, and that is someone in this said that she was probably stressed, and that's why she got a cold sore. Now, when you're stressed and you develop a cold sore, that's because herpes virus that's been hiding in your neurons is reactivated.
So she should have had maternal antibodies.
So she should have had maternal antibodies. There's something else going on in this story that we don't know about.
Maybe it made her more susceptible to the virus to begin with.
The mother?
Yep. It's possible, right? I mean, stress does dampen the immune response.
I suppose it could have been her primary infection, yes. So that would have been her primary infection. Maybe she caught it at the hospital.
Tell me one pregnant woman who isn't under stress.
Yes.
I mean, I think that comes with the territory.
So you're right. Maybe it was her primary infection, not a reactivation.
Plus, there is an immune diversion response that goes on during pregnancy. Not an immune suppression. We used to think it was a suppression, that the mother became suppressed in favor of the offspring. But it actually is a diversion of her immune cells that actually home in and help out around the placenta. So she's being depleted, but it's not actually going out of her body. It's just going away from some of the sites.
So she was more susceptible to infection.
I can already tell you that they're more susceptible to the common cold, to any mucus surface agent that would get in through those roots. So this sounds, I would say it's consistent with a first exposure to herpes virus that was very unfortunate in terms of the timing. Exactly.
I'm surprised we don't see more of these kinds of infections.
Well, you do
because
with
not
rubella.
Not everyone.
We have this big list of organisms, right? The torch test, TORCH, and a lot of those letters are viral in nature, right? So you have to worry about those things in a pregnant mother for the first time. So maybe we should add herpes to that. And I think that is there, isn't it?
Yes.
TORCH. The H is for herpes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So this is, in the baby, of course, died of encephalitis.
Yeah.
Or maybe disseminated herpes. We don't know from the
Ouch.
from the article, but it's not very pleasant.
Absolutely not.
So it's probably not a bad idea that at least pregnant women get immunized. Of course, we don't have a herpes vaccine.
I was going to say.
Many companies have worked on them. And in fact, Friday here, you might be interested, there is a seminar in our department by David Knipe, who is a herpes virologist from Harvard, and he's going to be talking about a herpes vaccine.
Interesting. So, in France, they don't have that problem, Vince. They immunize on one day of the year. It's called Bastille Day.
Right. A tough week for viruses, don't you think, Dick?
Yeah.
Actually, this is not unusual. Next story up is from Reuters Africa, where apparently a new disease is causing hemorrhagic fever.
Another one.
Killed 3 people in South Africa, and others are apparently infected. This is what they're calling a new type of arenavirus.
Really?
You know anything about arenaviruses, Dick?
Well, since I'm not a virologist, my guess is that these are the ones you'd find when you go to the football games because they only hang out in arenas.
Are you a comedian?
No, but my son is. I must tell you that I have a son who is a comedian, and I didn't get that joke from him nonetheless. Arenaviruses
are a collection of RNA-containing viruses, similar to some of the ones we've talked to so far, and they have membrane envelopes around them. And maybe the most famous arenavirus is Lassa fever virus.
I actually knew that, but I was holding back on you.
You don't hold back, Dick. Let it all out. Someday we need to tell the story of Lassa.
I'd love to.
Because were you here at Columbia when
I was,
Jordi Casals, he lived in the neighborhood. He worked at Yale and lived in the neighborhood, got infected in his lab at Yale, was treated here at Columbia.
I know that whole story, Vince, and I can give you a recounting of that if you'd like, because John Frame was the gentleman whose nurse came from Lassa, Nigeria, medevaced to Columbia University, and I know all the details
Fabulous.
of that story. Because
we'll do that at another time.
I would love that.
That would be great.
Yeah,
you're such a good storyteller.
Oh, wow.
And so...
hopefully it will be a true story.
Anyway, so there's a new virus related to these arenaviruses, but it's not the same as any of the known ones. How would they know that, Dick? Do you know?
I guess they could do a serological survey on this, or they could actually sequence the viral genome.
They're sequencing. Apparently, they've sent samples from the patients to CDC and also to Ian Lipkin's lab here at Columbia. Right across the street, we can see his building. And so these samples are there, and he's sequenced them, and he's found that it's a new virus, but it's related to Lassa and the arenaviruses, but it's new.
Do you know how they're transmitted, Vince? Because I do.
Tell me how they're transmitted.
They're transmitted through a multi-mammate urine dropping, actually. This is natalensis is the name of this rat.
Mastomus natalensis.
That's the one. And at least up in Nigeria, this is a very, very common rodent. And the urine of that rodent, if it gets in your area, if you're exposed to it before it dries out completely, then you have a good chance. Now, doesn't that sound like another viral infection we know about? Hantavirus.
Yes, spread by rodent urine.
Rodent urine, in this case, mice. But I don't know whether rats can have Hanta or not. I presume they can because they're still rodents.
I'm not sure, but certainly mice for sure.
Yep.
And we should actually talk about the Hantavirus incident, which happened a few years ago in the U.S.
In Queens.
How the virus...
and then
there's one in
Four
Queens
Corners
as well.
That's right.
Four Corners, which was the original one.
Exactly.
It's a very interesting epidemiology.
Oh, I totally agree. Again, medical ecology figures hugely in this thing.
But again, you see, there are new viruses always being discovered.
You bet.
Because probably as we get more and more people on the Earth and they interact with animals more and more,
yes,
that's what happens.
Exactly.
We have to have Steve Morse to talk about emerging viruses with us someday.
You bet.
Would he be happy to join us?
Oh, he would love to.
Very good.
If anybody loves to talk, it's Steve.
He likes to talk?
He loves to talk.
Excellent. We will do that.
And he's a very good storyteller as well.
Oh, great. Then he will compliment you. I can just sit back and relax.
Well, he and I actually give a course together here called Emerging Infections. Mm-hmm. So I listen to all these stories. So I'm relating them
I need to go to that course. I should sit in and listen.
We would love you to lecture on it.
Is he lecturing this week?
I actually don't know what the schedule. I'll look it up after we finish our broadcast.
Next story, Dick, is from Australia again, and it's about Hendra virus.
Uh-huh.
Now, Hendra virus is an interesting virus. This is a virus which is found in flying foxes. Dick, what is a flying fox?
Is it a bat? It is a bat. It's a giant bat. In fact, I've seen these bats. They're up near Brisbane. And they're giant flying animals, then they call them flying foxes because they're about as big as a fox. They've got a weird long face, and they eat fruit. They're also called fruit bats.
Ah, okay.
So they're not carnivores. Thank God they're not carnivores because they're huge.
The gist of this story is that this virus, which we'll talk about in a second, is found in flying foxes, and so people in Australia are killing them because they're scared, but they're really harmless bats. And the article has said, please don't injure a flying fox. Call this number, and we'll take care of it.
Right.
But Hendra virus is a recently discovered virus. It is an RNA-containing virus, enveloped, a member of the paramyxovirus family, which also contains measles virus, mumps virus, very well-known human pathogens.
Interesting.
But Hendra virus is an equine pathogen, first isolated in 1994 during an outbreak of respiratory and neurologic disease in horses and humans in Hendra, which is a suburb of Brisbane, Australia.
Now, isn't that interesting that all of the viral names that we have today are actually names of places?
Yes, many of them.
Lhasa,
except
Ebola, Hendra.
Yes, this is
Hanta.
very common to do this. And some places don't want to be associated with the virus name.
Like Norwalk. We'll get to Norwalk.
Now, the Four Corners virus was then changed to sin nombre, which
Exactly.
means no name.
That's right.
Because Four Corners, where the 4 states join.
Exactly.
The
The tourist
of the
industry
US.
would have gone to hell.
Yeah, they
under it.
didn't want to be associated with this pretty bad virus.
Exactly
So,
right.
yes, Hendra is from this suburb, and apparently this is a horse flying bat virus. So the reservoir is the flying bat.
Right.
And occasionally these bats must bite horses and transfer the infection, or maybe a mosquito transfers it.
I think it's a urine problem.
A urine problem. Now, not a mosquito. Certainly not. Excuse me for misleading my audience, our audience.
That's okay. In fact, the flying foxes also carry another virus, which we've touched on, and that's the Nipah virus.
Nipah is another very related virus, which originated in a village in Malaysia where it came from pigs.
Exactly.
And
which it infected pigs. Actually, it came from
pigs.
bats.
There was an outbreak in the pigs.
Fruit-eating bats.
Cultured pigs. Cultured pigs. They go to the opera.
Domestic pigs.
Domestic pigs.
That's right. These are real red pigs.
And it jumped into some of the pig farmers. So now these are two examples of zoonoses, right? Virus infections that go from animals to humans.
You bet.
And they can cause some nasty respiratory illness and encephalitis. And there are good examples of new viruses.
And SARS is in that category as well.
Exactly. So people in Australia, knowing that the reservoir is this flying fruit bat, are kind of afraid. And so they're killing the bats. But they really
The easiest way is to stay away from them.
Yes, you should do that.
But to keep your horses away from them, that's another problem, though, isn't it?
A horse, it's difficult.
And what do horses eat? Like, let's say you have a fruit farm. Let's say you have apple trees or pear trees. Yes. There's a lot of that in Australia, by the way, and it's all along the coast. And obviously, Brisbane is on the coast. And I've actually visited this area because I did my sabbatical in Melbourne. So I had a chance to travel as I was there for 6 months. And I made it up to Brisbane. I went up that river. And I'm blocking on the name of this river, but they'll just kill me for forgetting it. It begins with M. This was a while back, folks. It was in 1986, so give me a break here. There's a big river that comes out in the middle of the city of Brisbane. It's quite beautiful. And they do these boat trips up the river. And at the end of the boat trip, you end up in a koala bear preserve. And along the way, you see all these fruit bats hanging upside down on these trees. And then every now and then one flies off, and you can't believe how big they are. You know, the wingspan's about 3 feet.
Wow,
and they're enormous. You can almost hear them flying. And you can understand why people would be afraid of them, because they look so intimidating. But they actually eat fruit. So there's no need to be afraid. But imagine now raising horses on a farm that has an orchard. And it's the fall. And they call it the fall because that's when everything falls, including the apples. Now, when the apples fall on the ground, not only do the horses eat the apples, the fruit bats eat the apples. So let's say you're a fruit bat and you're sitting up in the trees and you're looking down on the ground and you see an apple on the ground. And this happened in the mango farmers also in Malaysia. The bat flies down onto the ground, grabs the apple and starts to eat it. And the horse says, no, wait a minute, that's mine. Now, if you were a fruit bat and you saw an animal that size coming at you, what would you do?
So you bite the horse.
No, you don't bite the horse. No, you
pee on it.
you defecate and pee and fly off. That's exactly what you do. You're scared blankless, as they would say.
So
you fill in that blank.
Passed in the urine.
And here it is now on the apple or on the mango, and now the pig or the horse gets it. And you either get Nipah in one side or you get the Hendra virus on the other side.
So the reason why these infections are a concern is because with more introduction into humans, the virus may change so that it now can pass from human to human and then really become a terrible pathogen.
Yeah,
so
we have one that we're worried about that, don't we?
Which one was that?
The influenza H5N1.
Which we'll talk about. Did you have your flu vaccine yet?
No.
You can get it free here.
I do know.
I went last week.
Did you?
Yes. First ever.
Really? I got one about 3 years ago, but
sometime.
Which strain did you get?
The lady who gave it to me wouldn't tell me.
This is all the problem with this thing, right? You have to guess ahead as to what the next outbreak is going to be.
Well, it certainly wasn't an avian vaccine because we're not yet at that point. It's just a human. It's probably a mixture of H3N2 and H1N1 strains.
So you cover the two.
We're covered. All right, so that's Hendra. And I think we should do one more thing, Dick, and then wrap this up.
All right.
So the past week, there were several outbreaks of norovirus. Infection. You know what noroviruses are?
I know what it used to be called.
What did it used to be called?
It used to be called Norwalk virus.
Exactly.
And the reason it was called Norwalk virus because it's from Norwalk, Connecticut. That was where the first outbreak was. So they had that name changed. Because I think Norwalk, Connecticut started to resent the fact that there was a disease named after them.
So this is quite a significant disease. This is a human pathogen.
It's awful.
Passed from humans to humans.
This is an awful... I've had Norwalk virus.
The disease is gastroenteritis.
It's horrible.
Vomiting and diarrhea.
And you don't want to eat for 3 days, and you're sick, you can't get out of bed.
But you do recover in a few days.
This is true.
It's a very rapidly developing illness, 24 hours incubation, and you're better in 2 or 3 days.
That's right.
But it is a virus that grows in your intestines, hence the gastroenteritis.
Yep.
And you shed it in your feces and in the vomit.
Sounds like polio to me.
Very easy to spread. Much more infectious than polio. I shouldn't say infectious. When you're infected, you have symptoms much more frequently than with polio.
Right. Can I ask you a question here?
No.
Can I give you an answer?
Sure you can. Of course.
The answer is Coxsackie, New York. What's the question?
What virus was isolated in a small, sleepy, upstate New York hamlet?
Of Coxsackie. So is there a relationship between the Norwalk virus and the Coxsackie virus because they're both enteroviruses?
No, there's very little relationship. Coxsackie much less frequently causing gastroenteritis.
Right.
But the Norwalk viruses are also RNA viruses. They have icosahedral protein shells, so they're very stable and they can easily pass through the stomach and the intestine, which are not hospitable places.
Right.
And these viruses cause what people call stomach flu, which is a incorrect name because flu doesn't replicate in your stomach. It's gastroenteritis, viral gastroenteritis, or non-bacterial gastroenteritis because some bacteria can also cause a similar disease.
Right.
And they're typically passed from one person to another by contaminated food.
Exactly.
So the past week there was an outbreak on a cruise ship where over 100 people got infected. This is a very typical outbreak situation because a food handler is shedding this virus, doesn't wash their hands properly, and contaminates
spoils
food.
The whole crew.
And 100 people get sick. And you know what they have to do? Go to their cabins and stay there until you stop.
What a fun tour that must have been, right?
Yes. There was also an outbreak in Canada at a school. Again, 60 or 70 kids. All of a sudden, they all get sick at once because they all pick up the virus from a common source.
Right.
And you will see this now as the winter months come. We'll see this more and more in these kinds of settings. You also see them in hospital settings, unfortunately. There's no vaccine for this virus.
No, not yet.
There's no treatment. So what do you think you could do to prevent infection with these noroviruses?
Well, I would lean toward sanitation.
Very good sanitation.
Excellent, yes. I mean, wash your hands. Employees must wash hands before returning to dining room. I never see that last part.
See that sign in the restaurant?
Yeah, it says employees must wash hands. You know, if you're from another country and you get a job as a food handler in the United States, you might be able to read the sign, but I'm sure you don't know what it means.
No, but that's in part because of norovirus infection. As well as some others.
Salmonella and Shigella.
Exactly. Okay, so Norwalk-like viruses. There are a few other RNA viruses that cause similar kinds of syndromes, but remember, it's viral gastroenteritis, not stomach flu. I think a pitcher in the World Series just the other day in the paper they said he had the stomach flu. He had fever and diarrhea, but he went to pitch anyway because it's the game of his life. He probably had a norovirus infection and everything.
Hopefully he didn't give it to the rest of his teammates.
Could have been on the ball.
If they had won...
He put it on the ball. And
imagine them winning the World Series and they're passing this bottle of champagne around and this guy passes it. Everybody gets norovirus. They can't... I wouldn't wish that on anybody. And I'm a Mets fan. And I have a
Mets aren't in the World Series.
No, of course they're not. So I wouldn't wish that on the Phillies.
All right, now it's time for our podcast of the week. This is our first podcast of the week. I think every week we should pick a science podcast that we like. And I found one very recently by a physician, Dr. Ginger Campbell, and her podcast is called Brain Science Podcast.
All right.
You can find it on iTunes. I'll put a link in the show notes.
Nice.
But it's all about neurobiology and brain related things. And the reason I like it is it's well done. She has interesting guests. It's very interesting. And she also has kind of an aggregation site where she's trying to accumulate all of the science podcasts, and that's called sciencepodcasters.org. And so I'm asking her to put This Week in Virology there. Hopefully she will, because there are just a handful right now. Her own podcast, there's a Nature podcast, for example, and a few others. So I think we would like to be in that list so that we get more traffic.
You bet.
Any virologists out there listening? If you want to join us, we'll arrange for you to call in. You can have a chat with us, right, in a future show. That would be fun.
You bet.
Now, I'm teaching a virology course right now at Columbia, and if you want to learn basic virology, I put all my lectures up on iTunes. There's the slides and my audio as well.
Oh, wonderful.
So it starts at the beginning of a virus infection. I'll put a link in the show notes if you want to take that course, and I think you should take it, Dick.
I do too.
Very good.
I need it.
And remember, if you have any questions...
I need to ask, before you go any further here, Vince, are they using your book? And how far along are you in terms of revising your book on basic virology?
So what Dick is referring to in a veiled way is my textbook of virology, which is called Principles of Virology. It's published by ASM Press. We'll put a link in the show notes. And it's in its third edition now. It's complete. It should be coming out within a few weeks.
Excellent.
And you can get it on Amazon or Barnes & Noble online.
That's great.
We have a link in our website. You can buy it through there so that you help our podcast. We get a little commission from that. But this is the third edition, the most up-to-date. It's a very nice book, excellent illustrations, all color. And this edition is in 2 paperback volumes, so you can carry it in your backpacks more easily.
Neat.
Right? And when I... get my copy. I'll give you one signed for free, Dick.
Vince,
what do you think?
I'll give you one of mine then. How's that?
All right. If you have any questions or comments, please send them to TWiV, TWiV at TWiV.tv. That's our website. You've been listening to This Week in Virology. Thanks for joining us. See you next time.
Okay, Vince.